Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He had found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer, until the only lights left in the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled.
"How did you know it was me?"
she asked.
"My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly."
"You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day,"
said Professor McGonagall.
"All day? When you could have been celebrating? I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here."
Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily.
"Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating all right,"
she said impatiently.
"You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news."
She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window.
"I heard it. Flocks of owls. Shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He never had much sense."
"You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years.
"I know that,"
said Professor McGonagall irritably.
"But that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumours."
She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something. But he didn't. So she went on.
"A fine thing it would be if on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about all of us. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore?"
"It certainly seems so," said Dumbledore. "We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop?"
"A what?"
"A lemon drop. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of."
"No, thank you," said Professor McGonagall, coldly, as though she didn't think this was the moment for lemon drops. Everyone my age remembers where they were and what they were doing when they first heard about the contest. I was sitting in my hideout, watching cartoons, when the news bulletin broke in on my video feed announcing that James Halliday had died during the night. I'd heard of Halliday, of course. Everyone had. He was the video game designer, responsible for creating The Oasis, a massively multiplayer online game that had gradually evolved into the globally networked virtual reality most of humanity now used on a daily basis. The unprecedented success of the Oasis had made Halliday one of the wealthiest people in the world. At first, I couldn't understand why the media was making such a big deal of the billionaire's death. After all, the people of planet Earth had other concerns. The ongoing energy crisis, catastrophic climate change, widespread famine, poverty, and disease, half a dozen wars. You know, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. Normally, the news feeds didn't interrupt everyone's interactive sitcoms and soap operas unless something really major had happened, like the outbreak of some new killer virus, or another major city vanishing in a mushroom cloud. Big stuff, like that. As famous as he was, Halliday's death should have warranted only a brief segment on the evening news, so the unwashed masses could shake their heads in envy when the newscasters announced the obscenely large amount of money that would be doled out to the rich man's heirs. But that was the rub. James Halliday had no heirs. At the stroke of 9, the largest radio audience ever gathered tuned in. Over 500 stations were broadcasting the speech in the United States. This was the golden age of radio, with popular shows like Jack Benny and Amos and Andy, and yet no broadcast had ever lured more attention than the president's speech. The only one that had come close was the Joe Louis-Max Schmeling fight at Yankee Stadium 2 years earlier. Amid the rubble of Britain's cities, at 3 a.m. London time, thousands, including Prime Minister Winston Churchill, crowded around their radios. Roosevelt's address would be broadcast in South America, China, the Soviet Union, and in 6 languages in Europe. Roosevelt began. My friends, this is not a fireside chat on war. It is a talk on national security. Because the nub of the whole purpose of your president is to keep you now, and your children later, and your grandchildren much later, out of a last-ditch war for the preservation of American independence and all of the things that American independence means to you and to me and to ours, the president said. And then, gravely, never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now.